office here in Indiana has been absolutely just overwhelmed by a wave of unemployment claims. Normally, they receive 2 to 3,000 claims in 1 week, and at one point, they were receiving 174,000 claims per week. So they are absolutely doing the best they can. The best I can say is to be patient, continue to check your account on Uplink. They're working through them as quickly as they can. They just are, they just have a lot of volume.
Is there something that you should be looking for to know whether they're processing your claim or if you were denied, or will that be pretty obvious?
If you filed a claim for unemployment through the Department of Workforce Development's system, which is called Uplink, it's online. If you go into your account, it will either say that it's processing, and they may say they found an issue on your claim, just be patient. And if it's denied, it will be obvious that it's been denied. And at that point, you can either choose to appeal, or you may have an option then to apply for the federal benefits for the contract employees or the self-employed.
Okay, and so unemployment does not just apply to someone who has lost their job. It can also apply to someone who's lost wages. Can you talk about that?
That's correct. So I think what you may be referring to is what we would call being partially unemployed. So, for example, as we're moving into this next stage of the governor's plan of businesses opening up, but on limited basis, limited hours, limited occupancy for buildings. Some people may be returning to work, but they may only be returning to a limited schedule of hours. And so they're not making what they used to make before. They may still be eligible for unemployment benefits.
Okay, I think that's really important information. Let's next talk about family issues. It's been some time together in the house with the family. Can you guys talk about what sort of questions you're getting and what people can do if they're finding themselves in a situation such as domestic violence? If you suspect child abuse in the home. Talk to me about what can people do if they're not in a good situation right now, family wise.
Kara, I can address that as well. The people are we have seen a rise in domestic violence incidents since the quarantine has been put in place, not just in Indiana, but it's been global. First of all, if you feel unsafe, and if you feel that you need to get out of your home situation, there are domestic violence shelters in central Indiana. The Julian Center is the one that we partner with. And the most important thing is to get in touch with somebody and formulate a safety plan to get out and get into shelter.
Thank you so much. Let's talk next about evictions. That's one of the most common questions that we get, is that their landlord has started eviction proceedings while this pandemic is going on. Chase, can you talk about what does the law or the regulations say right now?
Yeah, so the main thing we want to start with is the state moratorium. So the governor, as part of his emergency powers, issued an executive order that prohibits landlords from filing any new evictions or foreclosures until after June 4th, now June 4th, 2020. So if a landlord is attempting to evict someone through self-help, by changing their locks or turning off their utilities or something like that, they really should seek legal assistance. And I'd also recommend they file a complaint with the Indiana Attorney General's office. I know that they are looking into the landlords that are violating the emergency orders as well. And then on the flip side, on the federal side, there are also some additional protections for federally subsidized properties. So things like public housing, Section 8 programs, LIHTC, Section 42 housing. They have a foreclosure prohibition because of the Federal CARES Act until July 25th, 2020. So it's a little bit longer. So what we're going to be looking out for is landlords who aren't following those procedures and are filing the evictions in Indiana, although they might be under a covered property. And then also guiding tenants through situations where a landlord may be attempting to violate their rights by evicting them through self-help.
I think it's important to know, though, that once this is over, people are still going to have to pay their mortgage. They're still going to have to pay their rent. So people should be preparing for that. Can you talk about that? Is that a common misconception that people think that money that's accrued over this time, they're still going to owe that, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the governor's order was very clear that it doesn't affect the contractual rights of the parties. So that means that they still owe their landlord that money, and they're going to have to figure out a way to either come up with a payment plan or seek emergency assistance. So what we really advise people to do if you need help is to call 211 and get access to some emergency assistance. We have the United Way COVID Relief Fund in central Indiana, and there are a number of the other local United Way agencies have some funding available as well. So that's where I'd primarily suggest that people go if they're in need of rental assistance.
Hello, Lael. Thank you for joining us. Lael, do you have any questions? You just shout them out on Facebook. We're going to try to answer as many questions as we can. Now, talk to me about foreclosure prevention. We talked a little bit about landlords, but talk to me about people that own their home and what is being done to address that.
So if somebody's afraid that they're going to get behind on their mortgage payments, what we'd encourage them to do is call 877-GET-HOPE. We do still have a hardest hit fund in the state of Indiana, and that is available to people who have lost a job or had a reduced income that fit into some other requirements, but it does have to be owner occupied. So as long as they own the home and they've got a mortgage on it and they've lost income as a result of particularly this crisis in the last few months, they should seek out help through a HUD-approved housing counseling agency. We also are a HUD-approved housing counseling agency, but there are a number of agencies throughout the state that might be able to assist people. We don't entirely know what to expect in terms of volume, but we suspect that, if we're nearing 600,000 Hoosiers filing unemployment, there's going to be a lot of those people who are homeowners that are going to need help. And we just want to rise to the occasion and be a resource for people ourselves as well.
Give me that phone number one more time for people that missed it.
877-GET-HOPE.
Got it. Okay. We also have Kelsey joining us. Thank you so much. Can you talk to me about immigration? What sort of advice do you have or what sort of issues are you hearing from people on the immigration front?
Sure. Well, it's been obviously a very scary time for a lot of folks out there. I mean, it's scary for pretty much all of us, but when we're dealing with our immigrant neighbors, there just are some unique things that they're dealing with that can make things especially difficult. Right now, one of the biggest things that we're trying to stress for any of our immigrant neighbors who are feeling ill or who think that they may have been exposed to COVID-19, the government has issued that there will be no penalties for any immigrants who are seeking treatment or testing for COVID-19. That will not count against them in any of their processes. So we are encouraging people to make sure they get the healthcare and the services that they need. One of the other big things that's going on is that the immigration courts have been canceling a lot of the hearings because of all the closures. So they just issued an update, I think this week, that all non-detained immigration court cases, so all people who are in immigration proceedings, so deportation proceedings, who are not in custody, those hearings are all being postponed. They're currently postponed until at least May 29th. And then all in-person services at the USCIS field offices, so where people go for their interviews or when they have to have their fingerprints taken, things like that, the USCIS offices are currently closed until at least June 4th. So those are just some big updates that we've been trying to make sure people are aware of, especially the court hearings, that people aren't trying to make these trips to Chicago. For anyone that's not aware, that Chicago is the location of our immigration court for people who are here in Indianapolis. So that is a far journey for people, especially right now.
Thank you so much. And we have gotten a comment from Kimberly. She's expressing frustration with the unemployment system. She says she can't get anyone on the phone, is not getting any answers to her questions. Can anyone speak to that?
Yes, I can, Kimberly. I'm sorry that you're frustrated. I understand that you need those unemployment benefits, and it's very frustrating when you have to continue to wait. On a positive note, once your claim is processed and if you get benefits, those benefits will be retroactive to the date that you became unemployed. So you're not missing out on the benefits, except that you don't have the money in your account right now when you need to pay your bills. But if you can just be patient, earlier I mentioned that the Department of Workforce Development is experiencing a volume that they've never experienced before and that they hadn't anticipated. Normally, they hear 2,000 to 3,000 claims in a week, and they've been receiving on average 174,000 claims a week. And so they're doing the best they can. I believe they are. If you'll just be patient with them and just try to stick it out.
Yeah. It's hard to be patient when you're not getting paid. And so you can understand why people are frustrated. A lot of people are losing their jobs through absolutely no fault of their own. People that have worked hard their entire lives and are now finding themselves without income. It's very scary, especially if you've got mouths to feed, and you certainly feel for everyone that's in this situation. Let's go to Matt. Hey, Matt, how are you?
I'm good, Kara. How are you
We've just
doing?
been hanging out. So
Good.
talk to me about what are you seeing and what are you hearing at the Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic, and what advice can you give to people?
Yeah, so we have a lot of people that are concerned about with their stimulus check. They're concerned if their creditors can come and take their stimulus check. Um, Normally, creditors can put a lien, so to speak, on a person's bank account and go into that bank account and grab out money. And so people are concerned if they can lose their stimulus checks that way. The answer is no. Those stimulus checks are protected. They're not protected under federal law. Believe it or not, when Congress passed the law, they didn't even address this part in the law. But the Indiana Supreme Court issued a ruling that says that the courts can't put any more asset seizures on people's bank accounts to take stimulus checks. But here's the key part: if someone already has a lien, so to speak, on their bank account before the coronavirus hit and before the state of emergency, they need to, on their own, file with the court for a hearing so that they can protect their stimulus checks. So if you already have a lien against your bank account, if your account is already frozen, and the account was frozen before the state of emergency, then people need to come in and go ahead and file with the court and say, the court, I want to protect this stimulus check. So you just have to do proactive. If that happens, the court is going to have a hearing on it within 2 days. And then the court, ultimately, the stimulus check will be protected, but there's just this other step in there. There is one exception to that, though, and that is stimulus checks aren't protected from child support. So if someone owes child support, the stimulus check can be taken to pay child support.
Yeah, we actually have gotten some angry phone calls from people who owe child support. They're very upset that they lost their stimulus check. So good for pointing that out. I bet a lot of people didn't realize that. Yep. We have a question from Lael, and I happen to know Lael. Thank you, Lael, for the question. She says she has a client who's over 65 and is getting unemployment insurance, but he is scared to go back to work because he's at risk with diabetes. I don't want him to go back to work, but he needs an income. He will not get his benefits if he's not actively seeking work. Any thoughts on how at-risk Hoosiers can continue to collect benefits while it's still not safe for them to return to work? I know that's very sticky for a lot of people. Like, for example, someone works at a restaurant. The restaurants are now opening up at 50% capacity. If they have a job at this restaurant, they can't say, well, I don't feel safe. So how does that apply to at-risk Hoosiers, like this man who's in a client of Lael's? Can any of you address that?
Right. I'm happy to speak to that. If somebody is at risk, that is going to be a case by case basis. There's a list of sort of 10 categories of situations or individuals that can receive unemployment under the CARES Act, which is the federal act that provided these benefits for people who are unemployed due to coronavirus. You do have to be available for work if you're called back by your employer. However, if you are at high risk, according to what they've been finding so far, if you have lung disease, if you have high blood pressure, I think that the best course would be to contact your physician and have your physician write a letter or produce a medical record so that you can send those or produce those to the Department of Workforce Development to explain why at this time you're not able to go back to work yet because of your being at higher risk for complications from the virus. That's what I would recommend. I'm not
worth a try to get
Yeah.
a doctor's note, you know. And always try that. Okay, so we got a question from, Kimberly says she's a bartender. She's in stage 5 to return back June 14th, and she was let go in mid-March, and she wasn't sure if it was retro or not. But I think that's really good news for a lot of people, that even if you're still waiting, that it will, once it does kick in, you will get all that money that you're due. And can you talk about this? And I don't know if this is common knowledge, but what percentage of a person's income are they getting in unemployment benefits? It's not the full amount, correct?
It's not. So the maximum state level benefit is $390 a week. I had to think about that for a minute. And then the additional federal benefit is $600 a week. There is a formula that the department uses to calculate people's unemployment benefits. Quite frankly, it's somewhat complicated. It's available on their website in their claimant handbook. You can go through the entire calculation in the handbook. I'm not going to go through it now because I would mess it up. But they use a percentage of your previous earnings over the past 5 quarters to figure out what your weekly benefit is going to be going forward.
Okay. What haven't I asked? We've had a lot of really good information so far. Is there something that you guys are seeing or you're hearing in your conversations with your clients that you think that our viewers would really benefit from?
I can just add one thing. Something that we have been hearing a lot about at the clinic are calls from people who are concerned about their stimulus checks, that they haven't received them yet, or they're having some issues. So for that, we would just recommend that people give us a call so they can be connected with our low-income taxpayer clinic to see if there's anything we can help folks sort out. With that, we've also been getting a lot of questions from our immigrant neighbors about the stimulus checks because there is a caveat to that, that unfortunately families that are comprised of people of different immigration statuses, if there's a spouse or a child who does not have a valid social security number and has been operating with an ITIN number for tax purposes, those families are unfortunately going to be ineligible for a stimulus payment in most circumstances.
Yeah, we actually did a story that ran just a couple of days ago and heard from a lot of mixed status families in central Indiana who most commonly it was, the wife was a born and bred American citizen married to an undocumented immigrant, and the citizen, their children who are citizens are not getting these stimulus checks. And so when we posted it to Facebook, a lot of people's comments is that undocumented immigrants shouldn't get stimulus checks. But the point of the story was that it's the citizens who are not getting checks. So from what we understand, there is legislation that's underway in Congress that would potentially address this. So things may be changing. So I would imagine that you all have a lot to keep up with because things are constantly changing when it comes to COVID-19. I see you all shaking your heads because it's kind of like the fire hose of information over the past 2 months because as problems pop up, there's different legislation and policies and executive orders that are put in place and everything's changing. Let's also talk about family law. I know we talked about domestic violence, but talk to me about divorces and things like that. Is that any type of question that you all are seeing? Because I know people joke about it, like when I get out of this, I'm going to be divorced, or maybe that's just my friends. But is that something for real that you are getting a lot of questions about?
I can cover that a little bit as well. We are getting calls for divorce issues. I honestly don't know if we're getting more than normal. Our office, we don't typically handle a lot of divorce cases. We do a small subset of divorces that are referred to us generally by the Julian Center or other domestic violence shelters in the area. But we have gotten questions from people a little more generally about custody and parenting time issues during all of the quarantine time. And that is something that, just to point out for people, at the end of March, the Indiana Supreme Court did issue a directive order, basically just instructing people to keep maintaining the status quo to as much as it's possible. As long as no one is ill or there aren't any major issues, they are really wanting kids to still see both parents to the extent that they can.
Yeah, it's a really tough time. We did a story on that right when this all started about what were some of the best approaches to take. But, of course, we've gotten a lot of concerned phone calls from people that were concerned because their spouse was maybe taking their kids and potentially exposing them, and then they would come back. And so that's very hard in people that are married, let alone people that are divorced, trying to work all that out. And so what's your advice for people moving forward in those types of situations in terms of how to get through the rest of this time with your family, if people are finding themselves in a rough situation?
Sure, it's very difficult. And, I don't think that there are any easy answers. When you're looking at co-parenting during COVID-19 and the quarantine, the best thing that I can kind of think of with it is, it feels like life has been disrupted. It has. There's been all of these businesses, our lives have, the businesses have been closed. Things are just shut down. But the one thing that doesn't change is being a parent. You still have to parent your child. Your child is in an especially vulnerable state. This is scary for me. I can't imagine how scary it is for kids who can't go to school for months, can't see their friends. It's a really difficult time. So I think the most important thing, obviously, you want to keep your children healthy, but you also need to try to keep them in as much of a state of normalcy as you can. You don't want them to be exposed to a risk. You don't want them to get sick, but you also need to be mindful of the emotional harm of not getting to see another parent. So if that is what's best, if it's best right now that they can't visit with both parents, then we just need to get creative about how they can have meaningful contact. So we have Zoom, we have FaceTime, we have all of this great technology available, and everyone is at home a lot more. And so there's more time to spend on these technology platforms with each other.
Hey, Chase, can you talk about the stimulus checks and what people should do with them? Because, we've discussed before that a lot of people, I can't remember what the percentage is, it's something like 70% of the general public doesn't have like a month worth of savings or something like that. What should people be doing with the stimulus check if they don't have a savings in place currently?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if people have necessities that they have to spend the money on, that's what they should be spending it on. If they need to put food on the table or pay their rent, or any of those basic needs, of course they should spend it on those things. If they have in this time what someone might consider the luxury of establishing a savings account, an emergency fund is a must for any family, to make sure that you can get through a short term or even medium term financial crisis. And unfortunately, culturally in America, we don't have a good track record, for doing that. There's a lot of systemic reasons why that's the case, but it's also it's a cultural thing too in terms of how we spend money and don't emphasize savings. So, but these types of things, we never would have thought that such a steep economic decline would happen again, from what we just experienced in 2007, 2008. It felt like we were just really recovering from that in the last several years. And yeah, so the lesson that we have to learn from that is that to prepare for any kind of financial downturn like this, the best thing families can do is set up an emergency fund. Your first goal can be 1 month, 2 months of your emergency budget, and then the long term goal of having 6 months of expenses for your basic needs. And then the very last thing I'd say is, regardless of what your situation is, even if you're employed right now, sit down with your family and talk about what does our emergency budget look like. If we need to, what can we cancel? What can we afford to cancel? If I lost my job tomorrow, and what would that make our budget look like? That type of advanced planning is going to serve you really well and put you in a position to weather any kind of financial storm.
So unfortunately, pandemics bring out the worst in some people. Are you seeing anybody come to you that's been scammed?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even, I think, a week into this whole pandemic, and we were already getting notices from the Indiana Attorney General's office and other consumer protection agencies talking about people peddling, COVID-19 cures and testing kits door to door. And, when people are losing or potentially in risk of losing their housing, they get very desperate for opportunities that to save their homes. I know in the last crisis, we spent years having to report mortgage foreclosure rescue scammers who would come in and guarantee people they were going to get a modification for them and then take their money and essentially do nothing. So anytime there's a crisis like this, there's no shortage of scammers. I think what I really want to encourage people is, don't be embarrassed, report it, seek help. It happens to way more people than you would guess, and that's why they continue to do it, is because they're either not getting caught or people aren't reporting it out of embarrassment. So report those kind of things to the Indiana Attorney General's office or the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau if it involves a mortgage servicer or a lending institution. And if you're not sure who to contact, reach out to us and we can help point you in the right direction.
Yeah, one of the things that we've seen a lot is like the text message and the email scams where, might say, check the status of your stimulus payment, or, the IRS wants to talk to you. I mean, normally a lot of people probably wouldn't fall for this kind of thing. People are desperate for their stimulus payments, and they're desperate for their tax returns, and they're desperate for information. Scammers know that. Matt, you're nodding. Is there something you want to add to that?
No, I just agree. It seems like a lot of times when there's a crisis out there, it brings out the worst in people. And we will definitely see, like Chase said, scammers come in the future. And so we always encourage people to report that to the Attorney General's office.
Awesome. Let's talk a little bit more about the landlord-tenant issues. Chase, if you want to talk about that. Really want to get on, once we get past this, can you just clarify, once the eviction orders are lifted, do you anticipate a flood of evictions? And what should people do if they're so far behind on rent? What can they do to protect themselves from their home?
Well, it's a really good question. I'm really, really hopeful that it's such a broad issue that the housing providers are already thinking through ways to work with tenants and setting up repayment plans or whatever they can do to work with tenants. Because I have to imagine it's not going to be good business for them to evict 30% of their units. That's income that they're going to lose, and it's going to be hard to find somewhere else. So I'm hopeful about that. It's not every housing provider is going to operate that way. There are going to be housing providers that say, I want my money and I want it now. So if it's a situation where they just need financial assistance, they just need to pick up the phone and call 211, see what kind of resources are out there. If it's an actual legal issue, if it's an issue of they're being sued for a different violation of their lease aside from non-payment of rent, or it's a violation of the either the Indiana moratorium or the federal moratorium, then they should definitely seek legal help. It's kind of interesting, actually, when you look at the federal moratorium, there's a number of procedural protections in there that don't exist just on the state level. So, for example, they're supposed to, after the moratorium ends for federally subsidized properties after July 25th, 2020, if before a landlord can file, they have to give a tenant a 30-day notice in a non-payment case. In addition to that, they cannot charge any fees related to non-payment. So if they charge late fees or some other costs or penalty in pursuit of their rent money past the federal moratorium date, that's prohibited by the CARES Act. So there's a number of things like that where I would just suggest people, number one, try and work it out with your landlord. But if you can't, or you're having trouble negotiating with them, that's something that we can do in some circumstances, especially in circumstances where the landlord's not behaved properly.
Why don't you go ahead and put out your contact information for people, and obviously we can put it in the comments when we're done, or maybe Andrew from our web staff can put this information in the comments. Go ahead and give me your contact information. If people are having an issue and they need legal assistance, they can't afford private attorney, who can they contact?
Yeah, so you can contact us. Our intake line is 877-236-0730 is our current intake line. We're doing all of our intakes telephonically right now. In addition to that, if you have an issue specific to evictions, you can also contact the City of Indianapolis tenant hotline, and that's in partnership with Indiana Legal Services. That's 317-327-2228. And again, 211 for any of your other basic needs, your food, clothing, shelter, emergency rental assistance, anything like that. 211 is going to be your best centralized resource.
Okay. And if you are watching this and you are taking part in this town hall and you're willing to talk to me or RTV6 about your issue that you're having, you can email me at kara.kenny, KENNEY at WRTV.com. That's Kara, KARA.Kenny at WRTV.com. We're going to take another question from Katrina. She's a single mom. She says she's only gotten one unemployment payment, and now it says personal reasons non-payment due to unresolved issues. She's not getting any response to her phone calls, to her emails. She's worried about how to make ends meet, just wants the money that's owed to her. So have you seen that happen where you have somebody who gets a payment and then it says, unresolved issues?
Well, the only thing without, knowing a lot more about her specific situation and really actually having her do an intake, it's difficult for me to say, but once you are given unemployment benefits, you do need to file a weekly voucher on the Uplink system. And so each week when you file that voucher, you're affirming that at least for the purposes of right now with the pandemic, that you are available, and actively seeking employment, which right now just means you're able to return to work when your work is available. So there may have been some issue that popped up on the voucher that she filed that needs to be cleared up. That's the only thing I can think, but without knowing more, it's difficult for me to say for sure.
Yeah, so you can contact them. We put their information in the comments. We got a question from Rebecca Lisby, who says, do you know when Social Security is getting stimulus checks? So we actually did very early this week from someone who receives Social Security. We have not gotten any real response from the IRS or Social Security. Are you all at the hearing anything about people that are on Social Security when they might receive their checks? Because what we heard is that, at least when it comes to paper checks, it could still be months before those paper checks arrive.
I've heard that you're right, the paper checks are delayed, but some people that have Social Security, the electronic transfer of funds, the bank accounts are, it's already happening with people on Social Security. So people on Social Security are getting the stimulus checks right now electronically. The paper checks are another matter, and those have been delayed.
Yeah, the woman that we talked to, she filed a tax return via mail, and what we think may have happened is that they just haven't processed her tax return yet. Is that something that people should be aware of too, that if the IRS has not processed your tax return, then you're probably not getting your stimulus check?
Yeah, there's going to be delays in that case.
Okay. And so talk to me a little bit more about unemployment, because this really is probably the number one question that we get. For anybody that's just tuning in, what advice do you have to people who are still waiting for their benefits? Is there anything that people can do aside from being patient?
Well, the best thing that they can do is to make sure that they are checking in that uplink account regularly. Once a day is best. After you file your claim, a claims investigator is to be contacting you to find out more about your claim and verifying some information. So make sure that you're available by phone. Make sure you're checking your email, because the sooner that claims investigator can speak with you and get the information that he or she needs, the sooner that that claims investigator can move on to the next phase of processing your claim.
Thank you so much. Now we have a question from Michael, who says, what's the holdup with educators getting paid? But I'm not really sure what that is referring to. So Michael, if you are listening, if you can give us a little bit more information so that we can look into that for you, we would really appreciate it. And so what haven't I asked that you think that our viewers would benefit from? Any other sort of trickle down effects that you're seeing from COVID-19, this pandemic, and the unemployment?
We're seeing a lot of people with concerns about debt. Actually, there was a story on Channel 6 recently on their website talking about millions of Americans are taking out more debt right now, especially credit card debt, to pay for essentials because they're off work, their income's gone down. So a lot of people are concerned about debt. And we always see this after a big crisis. There's going to be an uptick in collection activities from creditors going after people. And so people are concerned. What do they do? Well, right now, not a lot of court hearings are happening because of COVID-19 and courts being closed. But once the courts start to open back up physically and have hearings, we're going to see a lot of collectors go after people, credit card companies suing people. What do you do? Couple things. One, if you do owe the debt, it's going to be hard to get out of it, and the creditor is going to attempt to garnish your wages. In Indiana, creditors can garnish 25% of a person's net income, but the judge can lower that to 10% of a person's net income if the person can prove to the judge that he or she can't afford the 25% garnishment. So you can write a letter to the judge saying, I can't afford this garnishment because here's my income and here are my expenses. I live paycheck to paycheck. I can't afford 25%. You can try to negotiate with creditors. Ultimately, if you can't do anything and you're on the brink of disaster, there is the possibility of bankruptcy. And we always see an uptick in bankruptcies after crises. And so it's always a last resort. Nobody wants to do it, but it is there. It's constitutional. That's why it's there, so people can get a second chance.
Wow, I was just thinking about just the blowback, the everything kind of rolling downhill, and the after effects that we're going to see. I mean, the impact of this pandemic is likely going to last for years and is going to impact people deeply. I sort of joked about pretty much every person that I've ever talked to has reached out about some sort of news story because it has impacted everyone in so many ways, whether it's their family or their job or a loved one or someone in a nursing home. We've done a lot of stories about people with loved ones in nursing homes. You guys do anything on that front?
Not particularly with nursing homes, but obviously I can understand why that's very difficult. I'm not sure what questions you're getting, but I mean, I have read some stories about how hard it is for families to have access to loved ones and be able to, visit with them and things like that under the current visitor restrictions. That's got to be very, 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 very difficult.
Yeah, I think that's just like the only other issue that we're hearing a lot from people lately. I think we've pretty much touched on everything else with regards to stimulus checks, to immigration, domestic violence, to consumer issues, housing and landlord issues. I think we've touched on so many different topics. So I'm just going to start to wrap. So I'm going to give each of you a couple of seconds to give you some parting words of advice and really some takeaways that people can do right now for issues. So if you want to start with Chase.
Yeah, so I mean, you kind of set it up nicely when you talked about how difficult this is going to be. I mean, we can't stick our heads in the sand and pretend that everything's going to be all right after what our economy is going through, what people are going through with real loss of jobs and loved ones. But the key takeaway that I want people to have is don't feel like you have to go through a crisis alone. Reach out for help. You're not the only one that's dealing with a hard situation right now. And services like ours and other community organizations, we exist to provide service to you. So don't hesitate to reach out and don't hesitate to ask for help when you need it.
Thank you. Matt?
I would say that one thing this crisis has taught us is to be better prepared and to plan ahead. And one way people can do that, we don't think about it a lot, but people should have what's a will, a power of attorney, and a healthcare representative form. A will to say who their property goes to if they pass away. A power of attorney that says if I can't manage my own affairs because I'm in the hospital or I'm incapacitated somehow, who can do that for me? And then a healthcare representative form that says if I can't make my own medical decisions because I'm in a coma or I've had a stroke or I'm on a ventilator, who can make those decisions for me? So those are kind of three important documents that people should consider.
Fantastic. I did that story right when this pandemic started about getting your affairs in order. It's one of those morbid things that nobody wants to think about, but it's just smart to do because none of us are living forever. And I think that this pandemic just has a lot of us thinking about our own mortality, unfortunately. Kelsey, what would you like to leave us with? Don't forget to unmute your microphone.
Thank you. Just to kind of piggyback off of what Matt was talking about, something that I have seen with a lot of people who are calling us are people with maybe parents or often older loved ones who have gotten sick and now they are incapacitated and they didn't have one of those healthcare forms in place. And so now we're needing to kind of guide them through the process to get a guardianship in place over that adult. So if that's something people are experiencing, give us a call so we can hopefully at least give you advice and guidance. And for anyone who has lasting immigration questions, I just wanted to let everyone know that we are doing weekly Facebook Lives on the clinic's Facebook page for immigration issues where people can ask questions. And those are bilingual in English and in Spanish.
Awesome. And Stephanie, take it away.
Thank you. So if you are unemployed or partially unemployed, meaning you're working less than you used to because of the virus and the changes that have taken place since all of this began, the best thing that you can do if you're not sure if you might be eligible for unemployment, file a claim because you have nothing to lose. If you file a claim and you're denied, there's no penalty, there's no kind of repercussions for that. You're just denied. But if you're eligible for benefits, the only way that you'll get those benefits is if you file.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us for the Rebound Indiana virtual town hall. So much great advice on so many different topics related to this pandemic and the fallout from this pandemic. And I believe we have a graphic that we want to show that shows some of the upcoming events for the Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic. They've got Talk to an Attorney Tuesday. That's from 5 to 6 every Tuesday. That's on their Facebook page, as well as Talk to an Immigration Attorney. That's every Thursday from 5 to 6 p.m. That's in both English and Spanish. And you can find contact information for the Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic on the RTV6 app and the indiechannel.com. And I appreciate all of you for taking an hour out of your evening to talk to us and to talk to our viewers. And this information will be so valuable as people look to rebound and to get back on their feet, back into the economy, and back to work. Have a good night.